Hadit, Sage Lissert Sadni, Saikana Lashabu Yenka Dene Keo. Hello, my name is Sage Lissert. I'm a carrier woman from the Lake Babine Nation. I'm the National Youth Ambassador for the Moosehide Campaign, and I'll be your host today. Studies show that Indigenous men are overrepresented in our prison system. Between 1996 and 2012, the rate of Indigenous people convicted went from 16% to 28%, even though Indigenous people only make up 4% of the general population. In the Truth and Reconciliation report, it was noted that many young Indigenous men are part of a cycle of violence that stems from the intergenerational trauma created by residential school systems. How do we put an end to this violence? In 2018, Jonathan Meikle got into a violent altercation with another young man on a Winnipeg city bus. The man who assaulted him, Devon Henderson, was convicted and sent to prison. Both are here to tell us about their journey as they tried to heal together after the incident.
Tense nina ski kapmota nikanis kotio makunero kinesosipi nindunji. My name is Earthwalker, First Fire of the Bear Clan. I'm from Norrie House Cree Nation. My government name is Jonathan Meikle. I'm here with...
I'm Devon Henderson. I'm from Passpia Cree Nation.
I'm going to go into a little bit about my story. Like I said, I grew up in Norrie House Cree Nation. Very fairly structured home. A lot of work to go around, and around my early teenage years, went from a very structured home to one that was a bit chaotic with my father's relapse. He had quit drinking for quite some time, and around that time in my early teens, he started drinking again. Eventually, that led to my parents' separation, and the spaces I gravitated towards were rough, I guess. I got into a lot of fighting. I went from not fitting in too well to finding a means of acceptance through violence. I had a lot of anger inside of me, so I took it out in fighting, and with things at home not going the greatest, I eventually found what I thought at the time was escape through the military. At the age of 16, I did the Bold Eagle 6-week basic training, and that introduced me to the military. And from there, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And at 17, I joined the regular forces full-time. I found myself in Saint-Jean, Quebec, doing my basic training. There, I didn't fit in very well. Culture shock didn't help. I was getting into fights every weekend with my peers. Coming from the reserve to the city was a culture shock. Coming from civilian life to military was a culture shock. And I didn't have the greatest coping skills. I eventually did deploy to Afghanistan at the age of 20. That left a huge void inside of me. Upon returning, I started to struggle with my mental health. A lot of drinking, a lot of drugs. I eventually did release from the military, and things went downhill. Was involved with the criminal justice system. Spent a lot of time in the remand center, a lot of one-nighters and the drunk tank. My relationships weren't the greatest. I did have a son shortly after I got out of the military, and the relationship I was in was a toxic one, mainly on my part. I struggled with insomnia, didn't sleep very well. The relationship kind of fell apart, and I went down a darker path. I moved back to my home community of Norrie House. I still did my best as a father. With that said, it was a struggle. I was back and forth between Norrie House, Cree Nation, and Winnipeg quite frequently. It's an 8-hour trip, so back and forth, and the environments that I moved towards while I was up there, it didn't take very long for me to get involved in the drug lifestyle, and everything that came with that. I got into illicit activities. I was I exuded a lot of violent tendencies. Again, started to get involved more with the criminal justice system. Eventually, I landed myself in jail. Not very long, but long enough just to look at myself. And you see, I've ended up in the remand center many times in the past, and in those times, it was always like high anxiety. Inside, like I don't belong here. I got this and this and this going on for me. It was a different feeling, and when I fast forward to later in life, it was quite different. It was like, well, this is who I am. It was comfortable, strangely, and it was a time in my life where I was full of self-loathing. I didn't like who I saw in the mirror. In fact, I hated who I saw in the mirror. I was very ashamed of who I was. While I was in jail, I was reminded of my role as a father, and that kind of challenged me to look at myself and look at where things have gone. And luckily, because of my tour in Afghanistan, I had supports available to me. I had Veterans Affairs who offered residential treatment. So I did 2 months of residential treatment after I was released from jail, about a month after. And that's where I started to gain the tools to deal with life. It wasn't so much about quitting drinking or drugs. It was more about how do you cope with life. And from there, I was introduced to the culture, to the Red Road. That's when I started to acknowledge being Indigenous, because before that, I rejected a lot of that. And another thing was appreciating holistic living. So with that said, the spiritual, the emotional, the mental, and the physical. Because before that, it was always the physical and the mental. And so by moving towards my spirituality and moving towards the Red Road, I started to embrace those things and seek balance amongst those 4 quadrants. And after I got out of residential treatment, I went back up north, and I realized very quickly that there wasn't enough support for addictions or mental health as a whole. And to me, that meant inevitable relapse. So I knew I had to move back to Winnipeg, and I knew I had to move back quick. I did, and I hit the ground not knowing what my future held. But I just knew I wanted better, and I really started to work on myself. I was struggling to find a place, and that's when a relative of mine reached out and said, "Hey, I can help you." And I was introduced to this nice old lady, Janet Ross, and her son, James Favel. If you're not familiar with James Favel, he's one of the founders of Winnipeg's Bear Clan Patrol. And when I met them, they actually bartered with themselves down. There was a set amount I was willing to pay, and James kept bringing it down and down and down until Janet finally chimed in and said, "You know what? We'll settle with this amount, and I'll cook and clean for you." And I was blown away by that level of compassion. Never seen that before, from complete strangers. And so I had a roof over my head and food in the fridge, and someone that treated me like family. So naturally, I started to volunteer with Winnipeg's Bear Clan Patrol and surround myself with the right people, doing positive things, engaging with the community in a positive way, and that started to bleed off into me, and I really appreciated that for my recovery. It helped build myself towards better character, and that's what I saw myself doing, was being a shkabe, a helper. I wanted to help other men that struggled in the same way I struggled. And at the time, I was learning how to deal with anger. Anger was a big thing for me. And more in particular, resentments. So how I viewed people who have harmed me or who may have harmed me, any negative feeling I may have held towards other individuals. And what helped me was a philosophy of acknowledging other people's stories. When I went into public, I made this a daily practice where when I people watched, I didn't just see faces, I saw stories. And I'd get curious. I didn't need to know everything. I'd ask, I wonder what that person's story is. I wonder what that person's story is. And I just, play this little game in my head, and that started to bleed into my character. I started to think about other people's journeys, and that way, when I was harmed, that's the narrative that would play out. It would change me from having a aggravated perspective, an angered perspective, to a more concerned perspective. Like, ouch, you hurt me. Well, why? What happened to you? What's going on in your life?
I was born March 30th, 1995. And 3 months after that, I was put into OCNCFS, and I became a permanent ward. And I pretty much always, I moved around a lot. I lived in 75 plus foster homes, was the last time one of my workers told me. I was born in OCN, El Paso Recreation, and to be honest, it was kind of like hard, especially being especially like living in pretty much like every foster home in that reserve. I met both my parents twice each. I met my father twice, and I met my mother twice. And like I talked to my mother like here and there, but I don't have that relationship with her, like a mother and son relationship. And same with my father, like I bumped into him a few times in downtown Winnipeg here, and like I said hi. I gave him some like food, and yeah, and I used to be a bad like I used to get in trouble a lot in OCN as a kid growing up. That's why I moved around a lot. Like pretty much like every week or 2 weeks or like at least a month, like I'd move into a new home. And to the point where like they had no more homes, they would ask me, who do I want to live with? Because there'd be no more homes for me to live in. So I did that a few times, and but it got to the point where I just like there's nowhere for me to live there. And yeah, I started getting involved with like the law like when I was I was just a kid, and I spent I was always in and out of jail too. That's one of the main reasons why I kept moving a lot too, because like I was always in jail, and then the OCNCFS has an office here in Winnipeg, so they moved me to Winnipeg thinking that it'll like help me like settle down and like behave, but to be honest, it didn't, because it just like I was like just a kid like from a reserve, and coming to a big city like with no like family and everything here. And I guess like I started getting locked up in the youth center here a lot, and I met like kids in there, and when I see them on the street, that's the people who I ended up hanging out with. And yeah, from there I just always in and out of jail. Like the longest I stayed out of jail for was 6 months, and this is actually the second longest I've been out of jail for right now. I got it October 23rd, and it's already January. That's really good. It's almost 3 months, and yeah, I see I bullied a lot in school too, just for being in CFS, being a CFS kid. Like I went through things like the homes I lived in, like say during like Christmas time, like I would get asked to leave. They would ask me, "Do you have anywhere to go for a few hours? We're gonna have family over for like supper," or like I'd even watch like their kids, like their own kids, their own children, open up presents when I didn't get none. So kind of stuff like that. It just made me like once I got to like my teenage years, I was like just angry at everything, So I acted out the way like I used to just act out and swear a lot and break things. And yeah, and I once I turned 18, I ended up getting locked up, and I ended up getting 5 years. So I ended up going to Stony, and then I ended up getting shipped out to Saspen. I did the majority of my time there. I was there when that riot happened there in December 2016. And then from there, I ended up going to Mission, British Columbia. And I got released from Mission in September 13, 2018. And I came back to Winnipeg, and kind of the same thing. I just like came back, like got released, and like pretty much with like nothing, and the only support I had were like negative supports. So that's the thing I went to, like, and that's when I met Jonny. That's when like he was just some stranger on the bus, and one of the main things that I would like to do is help children permanent wards that are in CFS. Like I think it'd be good like if someone with the experience, because then I know what it feels like. And even though I was same in the street life, because my whole teenage years, like I was homeless here in Winnipeg. like I wasn't homeless. Like I was homeless by choice because I lived in a lot of bad, like a lot of negative foster homes where like I was just a paycheck to them. So like I was just like I was always running away. I was like better off on the street, and I pretty much slept under every bridge in Winnipeg. And yeah, like I never really had anything like growing up. Like never really, I never really had a home. Just like little things like that. I never had a bed, but I actually have a bed now, like my own bed. Yeah, I never really had family either. Like I'm not close to my family, so it's good that I have like brothers in my life now.
I like what Devon said about wanting to help other kids in care, or other people that have grown up in care. Uh, that expression to want to break those cycles, and that's kind of what happened on the bus that day when we met. You know, everything that happened, as violent as it was. I saw somebody that was in a in the same struggle that I felt before, different path, different experiences, but similar in struggling with pain um, and negative experiences, and so I saw, in hindsight, I saw a means to break that cycle through that understanding and through that philosophy of asking those questions. You know, um, the media just wanted to focus on the hero story, and I saw that as problematic in this context because in the hero story, there's always a bad guy, and nobody ever pays much attention to who that person is. And so I wanted to change that narrative. And that's when I started to ask those questions. Who is this other person? What's going on in their world? Why did the things happen the way they did? And I wanted to move towards forgiveness because we have forgiveness and we have resentment. We have things that happen in our life. And we come to those decisions, whether we choose that forgiveness or that resentment. And that resentment is like poison. Because there are times where you come to those forks in the road, and there's times where those two things may not affect the other person, but there's one thing for sure: it will affect you. So if you choose the good or the bad, it's up to you, and that's what you're going to live with. And I'm very fortunate that I chose forgiveness because I was able to reach out and eventually meet my new brother, Devon, and learn about him. And I'm just grateful to be on that ongoing journey today. I'm grateful for the time that we spent together, getting to know each other, getting to understand each other, and learning to love each other. And I think in all of this, there's a strong message for our men, for our women, for children, because there's a lot of violence in our communities. There's a lot of things wrong that did not come from us. And in our way here, we have the 7 generations principle that the elders talk about. And it's a way of life to look 7 generations before and look 7 generations after, and that'll determine how you walk today. And so it's important for our communities to understand those transgressions that took place, not to dwell in them, not to feel sorry for ourselves, and not, for sure, not to feel sorry for our ancestors, but to look at the resilience that they demonstrated for us to be here today, the things that our ancestors have gone through so that we can be here today, working on our own healing. And I think that's important, that message for all of our people, is that we need to start being gentle with each other, forgiving each other, moving away from lateral violence and towards lateral empathy, lateral love, lateral understanding. We need connection. Our people were communal, and this idea of individualism, of hyper individualism, that puts up those barriers between us and divides us. We need to remove those barriers and come together and move towards a better place, move towards our collective healing. And that's what I believe in. And we need each other. We need to look out for each other. We could have taken everything that happened on that bus and it could have went a totally different direction. It could have been just another situation, because it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon in our communities. It wasn't the first time I had a knife in my face, and it's happened quite frequently. It's sad to say that it feels normal, and so I'm just, again, grateful for the path that we took, and everyone else involved in lifting an organization. Strengthen the Circle is a movement built in response to the prevalence of untreated trauma in Indigenous communities that is the result of discriminatory policies. So when we talk about this movement, it's through that 7 generations principle that we look back to our past and we look to our future, that past is what motivates us. It's that pain and suffering that brings us together. But it is our vision of our collective healing that solidifies the unity of this movement. What we're trying to do is challenge the existing, the problems that we face. We know that healing is needed collectively. Nobody is going to come in and save us. We know that. So what that leaves us with is the knowledge that we need to save ourselves. We need to be there for each other. We need to come together. We need to organize. And we need to challenge the existing, the harmful dynamics that are perpetuated from that discriminatory policy that was imposed by the Canadian government. Because those policies set in motion all these harmful things that are playing out, and the evidence of which is missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, boys, men, two-spirits, the overrepresentation of men and women in jail, the overrepresentation of youth in custody, the overrepresentation of children in care. We're highly overrepresented in all these areas as Indigenous people, and it's unacceptable. And so what we do as men with this organization is we take accountability. We stop pointing the finger outwards and we start pointing it inwards. And when we do so, that's when we realize our own power within to change. And we can begin to share power with each other. When we come together in our circles and we challenge these ideas of masculinity that are distorted. Ever since you're a little boy, you're told not to cry, not to show emotion, not to get vulnerable. And that stands in the way of our collective healing, of our own healing. So we challenge that. We try to pass that message on, that a strong man heals. And Ogichita, which for a long time, I thought it simply meant warrior, because that's the word that it translates to in English. But the extended translation is actually people of the kind heart, that warrior that leads with his heart. And so while I was out in Afghanistan, I always thought of myself as a warrior. And when I came back, I felt that things were owed to me. But I wasn't there for my community. And I struggled a lot because of that. And it wasn't until later in my healing that I learned the true meaning of that word, Ogichita, leading with the heart. And when we come together as men, we're constantly reminding ourselves of the pain and suffering of our communities and what we're contributing to if we don't choose to heal. Because we all have a role to play if we're going to get to this better place. And that's what we're trying to move towards with this movement, Strengthen the Circle. Which
in order to address the issue of violence, we have to be prepared to look at the root cause of violence. The Moose Hide campaign encourages men to help each other heal and strive to be better as a collective. Part of that healing means going back to traditional methods of healing the spirit. Fasting is one traditional way of starting that healing process. It gives us time to reflect and think of others. People don't want to be violent. Violence is one of many ways men deal with their anger. We would like to help men and boys discover different methods of dealing with their anger that don't harm themselves and those around them. The work that Jonathan and his group are doing is giving young men resources to heal and reintegrate into society. We encourage you to have a discussion based on what you've seen in this video. Feel free to use our discussion questions and consider doing some of the additional activities suggested in this workshop. Thanks so much and stay safe.